Volume 1. 1. Pale sunlight filled the entry chamber of the cave and glimmered against the smooth-shaped floor and the curved wall opposite the door. The sky was overcast, but in some places the thin clouds made the morning sunlight even sharper than usual, which brightened the otherwise dark space. Squinting, Fiona Scarborough leaned through the open door and gazed out at the now familiar valley that stretched out from the back entrance of the caverns. The cave-dwellers of Snowbird Caverns had worn many paths through that field from hunting and scavenging expeditions, though they were softened by the regular snowfall. Even the tracks of their recent visitors were still faintly visible, the twin lines of a sled's runners making a broad, shallow curve across the valley. It never ceased to amaze her, even after a couple of years, just how hostile and unlivable the world beyond the cave was. Working together, they'd managed to survive, with one exception. Fiona blew out her breath to keep from sniffling at their recent loss. Everyone had been thankful that she'd held on for as long as she had, but death waits for no one, and Myra had passed quietly in her sleep, leaving a hole in their small group. Then their visitors had offered to take the younger cult children with them. It had been decided that they would be better off growing up with children closer to them in age, and while Fiona missed their quiet chatter, everyone had agreed it was the right thing to do. Quiet bleating pulled Fiona from her spiraling thoughts, and she frowned, giving the lead line a tug as an older but still ornery Ramses resisted being dragged back into the cavern. Normally, the goats couldn't wait to get back in their warmer pen after walking outside in the bitter cold. Even Ramses usually came back willingly, though he might try to headbutt one of the females in passing. However, on this day, he was more stubborn than usual. "Come on, you miserable old thing," Fiona said, leaning back and giving the line another almighty tug before reaching behind him to close and latch his only escape. Now, just inside the outer door, Ramses was pulling for all he was worth. The she-goats were already congregating in their pens, but even they had shown some reluctance. "What the heck is wrong with you today?" Fiona asked. "I thought we were past this." She blew her breath out and let the line go slack. Ramses stopped pulling, but turned and pressed himself up against the door, staring at her with one of his weird yellow eyes. "Ramses, my old friend, I'm disappointed in your regression," Fiona said. "You've made so much progress over the years, and now it's like your old, wild youth all over again." She moved toward him, but as she did, Smoke, her Australian cattle dog, rose from his spot near the wall and came between them. The dog always felt protective of Fiona and knew Ramses couldn't be trusted. "You can't go back outside. You've been sheared. You're practically butt naked now. Do you want to turn into a goat popsicle?" Ramses bleated at her in reply. Smoke then barked, and a spooked Ramses kicked the door as if trying to force it open. "Okay, Smoke, okay," Fiona said. "Move aside. You're in the way." Smoke seemed to understand and moved to one side, and Fiona gave the line another tug. Ramses came toward her a few steps but began to resist again. However, Smoke was smart enough to maneuver around behind the goat, which made Ramses keep moving forward. "There you go," Fiona said. "Keep away from the big scary dog. Come on." She backed into the animal room, drawing Ramses across the corridor as Smoke stayed right on his heel. Finally, she turned and directed the big goat into his pen, kicking the door shut behind him. He gave a final bleat to express his resignation, and Fiona reached in and disconnected the lead line. "Was that so bad?" she said. "See how nice and warm it is in there. Why all the fighting?" She turned back around, winding up the line and tossing it onto a nearby shelf. Then she stooped down and gave Smoke a hearty scratch behind the ear. Suddenly the dog pulled away from her, as if he were uncomfortable. He whimpered, then turned and ran off down the corridor. "Geez, I didn't pet you too hard, did I?" Fiona asked. She felt a strange moment of dizziness and instability, followed by a noticeable vibration in the air. Startled, Fiona grabbed her forehead and stepped back, pressing herself against the doorframe. The vibration became a distinct trembling that rose up through the rocks. She heard distant cracking, like rocks breaking loose, and the goats and chickens went nuts in their pens. After a few seconds, it stopped, and everything went still. Fiona pushed off the wall and stepped out into the corridor. Bits of rocks had broken off the ceiling and lay on the ground. A haze lingered in the air, dust catching the sun and lantern light. Jared came stumbling out of the big workroom, pulling off a pair of leather gloves. He looked around, and his eyes locked onto Fiona. "Did you feel that?" he said. "Yeah," she replied. Her heart was racing, and she took a deep breath to settle it. "I think we just had an earthquake. Is that possible? Do we have earthquakes in Ohio? Is that a thing?" Larry and his wife Lana came out of the kitchen. "Kind of felt like a big train going by," Larry said. "But that's not possible. Must have been a good old-fashioned tremor." "Is the whole cave going to collapse on top of us?" Lana said as she wrapped both hands around Larry's arm. "Surely not." Everyone, including Fiona, was looking at Jared, the one with the most scientific background. "Well, I'm not a seismologist," he said, "but I think mild tremors aren't unheard of in the Ohio Valley. It should be fine." Fiona's hands were trembling, and she clasped them together. No wonder Ramses and the animals had been anxious. They'd sensed the tremor coming. "We'll be fine," Fiona said. "You're right, Jared. Just to be safe, though, maybe we'd better check around and make sure there's no significant damage." She headed down the corridor, and Jared fell in step beside her. They looked in each of the rooms in passing and found debris here and there. Rocks had fallen from walls and ceilings. Supplies had toppled. Mild damage, but still damage. The teens appeared farther down the corridor. Zane, Larry and Lana's son, was brushing dust off his shoulders, while Vanya, one of the remaining cave cult dwellers, had a hand pressed to the side of her head. Jared's daughter Hope stood next to Vanya's sister Samara, always the more talkative of the girls, who was helping to pick small bits of rock out of Hope's hair. Everyone congregated just outside the bedrooms. Fiona could see they were all shaken up as badly as she was. "What in the world was that?" Zane said. "Are we having earthquakes now? Don't we have enough stuff to worry about?" "A cave is pretty much the worst place to be in an earthquake," Hope said, working a pebble out of her hair and casting it aside. "If it had been just a little more intense, we could have been buried alive down here." The thought had occurred to Fiona, but hearing Hope say it made it too real, too much of a possibility. She shuddered and reached over to grab Jared's shoulder, needing comfort from the man who'd come to mean the world to her over the past few years. "What if it's a precursor to a bigger quake?" she said, then immediately regretted saying it out loud as everyone turned to her with wide, fearful eyes. "From what I understand, that's not very likely," Jared said. "But just in case, why don't I move our big sleds close to the door and load them up with some supplies?" "Dad, we won't need supplies if we're buried alive," Hope said. "A stronger earthquake isn't going to cause the whole cavern to collapse," Jared said. "Snowbird Caverns has been here for thousands of years at least, and I'm sure it has survived seismic activity in the past. But if we get a partial collapse from a stronger tremor, we may need to temporarily vacate the cave. If we have supplies near the door, they're unlikely to get stuck behind a pile of rocks." "Fine, Dad," Hope replied. but Fiona could tell the teen wasn't saying what she really felt. "Okay, you four help Jared," Fiona said. "Larry and Lana, why don't you two check our living quarters and storage rooms for damage, okay? Good. We have a plan then." She let go of Jared and started to move past the teens. "Where are you going, Fiona?" Jared asked. "Someone needs to check the deeper cave," Fiona said. "We hardly ever go down there anymore, except to collect water when the barrels run low," Jared said. "Yeah, but there are passages right below us. We need to know if there's been any significant damage down there that could threaten the stability of our living spaces. Keep an eye out for Smoke, too. He ran off, probably hiding from the tremor." And with that, she stepped past the others and started down the corridor. "Please be careful," Jared called after her. "You know I will be," Fiona replied. "You also know I'd love the opportunity to be alone for a little while," she thought. Yes, Jared was well aware of the raging introvert half-sleeping in Fiona's mind. Fiona appreciated how, despite their professed feelings for each other, he always knew when to give her some space. Like now, he didn't come after her. He let her march past the others and keep going down the darkening corridor. She passed the storage rooms, the kitchen and dining room, the bedrooms. Ahead, the lantern light and residual sunlight came to a gradual end, and the passage beyond turned to impenetrable, humming darkness. Fiona grabbed a lantern off a hook near her bedroom door, raised it high in one hand, and kept going. Soon she was alone, moving down winding passageways they rarely trod these days. Rocks had toppled down in many places, but they were all relatively small. The walls, at least, seemed intact. As she kept going, she passed one of the cult's old path markers, a blue arrow carved into the rock. There was a strange smell in the air down here, as if the shaking had stirred up old filth. And indeed, the air was hazy with dust. After a few twists and turns, she found herself in a familiar room. A great wall rose up in the distance, pockmarked with holes. It loomed before a deep pit and then a floor thick with guano. This had been a place of testing and trial under the cult's old ways. Fiona had no happy memories here, so she quickly backed out of the room. However, she noted that some small sections of the high, curved wall had collapsed, the pieces no doubt falling into the chasm along the far edge of the room. Even a short, relatively mild tremor had done damage in almost every corridor and chamber. That was troubling, and Fiona felt a growing unease, as if her guts were twisting up. "Of all the things I thought I'd be worried about since we moved in here, earthquakes were not on the list," she thought. She followed blue arrows for a while, checking out various places in the cavern. Finally, she rounded a sharp bend and found herself staring at an angled wall of freshly fallen jagged rocks behind a scrim of swirling dust. My God! The earthquake wasn't that large. It shook for a few seconds. But we've got a collapsed corridor down here. The others needed to know. Fiona turned and started back the way she'd come, checking a few more side chambers along the way. She found another collapsed corridor near one of their primary freshwater springs. The flowing water was still accessible, but just barely. Rocks had tumbled down behind it, and some larger loose rocks were barely hanging on above. If any more of this corridor collapses, we may lose access to fresh water. Another horrible thought. Of course, they could always melt snow, but the prospect of melting enough snow to meet their needs seemed daunting. She wondered if they would have to boil what they needed for drinking. Well, maybe that's why ancient humans left their caves, Fiona muttered. Can't trust them not to fall in. A bit of humor did nothing to ease her troubled mind. They'd worked so damn hard carving out a living space for themselves and building up their storehouse of food and supplies, and nature, in her capriciousness, could take it all away in a matter of seconds. It was truly depressing. When she got back to the living area, she found the others working together to load the sleds with boxes of supplies. The sleds had been lined up along the wall near the outer door. Jared saw her coming and moved to meet her. "Well?" he asked, drawing her into an embrace. He must have felt her shaking, for he pushed her at arm's length and gazed into her eyes. "It's bad down there, isn't it?" "Yeah, some places have completely collapsed," she replied. "Jared, I don't know any other way to say it. The cavern has lost some stability. If we have more earthquakes, even mild ones like that, we might have to leave this place." Everyone heard her say it, and there was a collective intake of breath. "We have nowhere else to go," Larry said. "It's this cave or the big cold world. What kind of choice is that?" "It might not come to that," Jared replied, hugging Fiona again. "We'll prepare for the worst, but let's take things a day at a time. We're okay for now. We're okay."